Welcome back. We're here yet again.
Yep.
Same spot.
Different day.
Same place. Different day.
Yep.
Sometimes a different day. So we are going to be covering Acts chapter 19, 21 through the end of chapter, verse 41. And it was an interesting one.
Yeah, I like
We say that a lot.
We say it a lot. Acts is full of all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Like it's exciting. It's historical.
Yeah.
There's so many things in Acts.
Yeah. A lot of, what is it? Is it narrative?
Narrative.
Of, hey, this happened.
This story.
Yeah. And then kind of jump to another place and,
Yeah.
hey, this happened here.
I think because somebody's writing about somebody else, unlike the Gospels, it's just a lot of stories.
Yeah. Or like the epistles where it's just to a person.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of historical context that needs to be brought up in these places as well. So we got some snow this week. Again, 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah.
Is that right? 2 weeks in a row?
Enough to, something like that. Enough to close school again. I'm good with that. My family's happy.
Nice.
Yeah. Yep. And then it's gone. I mean, roads are totally clear this morning. The side roads are still tough, so we canceled Bible study today.
Yeah, no Bible study this morning.
Yeah, I missed that. I missed that time.
Yeah. I'm ready for 80 degrees, to be honest with you.
Well, that's, yeah. I just asked you when I walked in if pitchers and catchers have reported yet.
Yeah.
Because that's the only thing I know and hear that y'all get excited about.
Yeah, you've got another 10 months or so before you start watching a game. Maybe 9.
Yeah. Is that the October?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll pick it up in October.
Yeah, so about 9 months.
Yeah, let it all work itself out.
All right.
And I'll watch a little bit of the World Series.
Good deal. That's kind of how I am with football.
Yeah.
Which divisional series?
Yeah,
Divisional championships is coming Sunday.
Is it division
right?
or
I don't know.
Man, I think we're down. No, we're down too. The whatever they call them.
Yeah, those things.
There's like 4 teams left, right? Yeah,
this is the spot where you need all your sports news because we have all the answers, right?
we know. I know a little bit about baseball. You know a little bit about football. That's all.
Let's get back to the text, right?
That's right.
That's what this means. All right, so we're going to be starting off, and so just kind of take us through the passage, Darren, and then we'll kind of stop and talk about the importance of some of these things that happen.
Well, first of all, if anybody's studying along with us,
which they should be.
Yes, 21 and 22 are very interesting because you have this, all of these things that are going on, and then Luke says he gives us Paul's personal thoughts on his travel plans, and it's just 2 verses right in the middle of chapter 19, and it's just very interesting because you have these miracles and the demonic man and the demon speaks to the 7 sons of Sceva. That's like, whoa, you kidding? And then in verse 21 it says, now after these events, Paul resolved in the spirit to pass through Macedonia and Achaia, go to Jerusalem. It's like, okay, where did that come from? And then we pick up to this great disturbance of the gospel in Ephesus. So it's interesting to me the way that what it reminds me of, and we brought it out a little bit Sunday, is that Luke is very detailed, and I like that because it lets us know what's happening, when it's happening, what's the context. Because of 21 and 22, we kind of know what Paul's thinking, what are his next plans, what does he want to do next. And then when you look at the history of this third missionary journey, you see that he did those things. Sometimes he was able to do them because of the riot in Ephesus, or the almost riot. He had to leave there a little bit earlier than he had intended, but he gives us his plans that he's going to go through Macedonia, Achaia, and then he wants to get back to Jerusalem. What we'll find out this Sunday we can't just read Acts 20. We have to go into 1 Corinthians, or first and a little bit of 1 and some of 2 Corinthians, because that's where Paul is writing these things that we're reading now in Acts about where he wrote Corinthians and why, and he was trying to get some money, some funds that had been given by these early churches, trying to get them to Jerusalem to help the poor. And it's fascinating when you look at all the way that all the history of all of these things, Acts and the epistles, all come together in the goal of the gospel, and also getting funds to Jerusalem, Paul's desire to go to Rome, all of these crazy things. So I love it. And putting sermons together on Acts, you have to go to these other places and put the whole puzzle together. And that can be difficult sometimes. So I spent this morning, we didn't have Bible study, and I missed that, but I spent that time just working through the map of the third missionary journey. So it's fascinating. So and he'll be on I say he will be on it. We have the record of third missionary journey from Acts 18 into chapter 21. So, Paul is fascinating. I could talk a lot about that, but basically what happens here is Paul's in Ephesus. The gospel is being shared, so much so that disciples are being made. So this isn't just a one and done, like, hey, Jesus loves you. They're making disciples. And because of that, and what happened earlier with the magicians burning their books and the sorcerers, and there are now the gospel is creating a disturbance, and people that were benefiting from the temple of Artemis, because anytime there's any kind of religion or any kind of like a sports team or a religious structure, whatever it is, they're going to sell a lot of stuff that goes with it. Kim and I were able to go to the Vatican a few years ago. We went to Rome, and we had one day in Rome, and so we went on a tour. And
sounds like a movie.
One day in Rome. That's right. Yeah. My movie would be called Tired Feet or something. I don't know. So we went to the Vatican, and there were tons of little shops, just little places all around the Vatican where you could buy crosses, you could buy Christmas ornaments, you could buy Bibles, anything, you name it, and it would have the picture of the Vatican on it or the picture of the Pope. So there are people that make money off of religion. They make money off, just like a sports team. Mm-hmm. Even when President Trump, leading up to Trump's presidency here this year, there were tents, people selling Trump shirts and Trump hats. And it's just crazy that anywhere there are things happening, people are going to seek to make money off of it. And the same thing happens in Ephesus, where we have Demetrius, who is a silversmith, and he leads other silversmiths, and they make trinkets, they make idols out of silver that people keep in their homes. It could have been jewelry that they were making. There were also craftsmen who made possibly wooden idols or things out of wood, and all of it was because of the worship of the goddess Artemis around this temple in Ephesus. And Ephesus was the hub of this worship of Artemis. And so these people begin to see, hey, you're cutting into our business. We're not going to give you credit that the gospel of Jesus Christ is the truth, but you're persuading people to follow whatever you're doing, and it's cutting into our business, because now people that were coming to us and giving us money for things are not, because they say they're now following a different God. And it created what Luke says, no little disturbance concerning the way. And I halfway love that, the way he words it, and then I have to remind myself to say the opposite. It created a great disturbance, and this is multiple times in Acts. And so there begins to be a riotous crowd. And so that we find in this particular text that all of these men get together, and yes, I'm upset, you're upset, let's be upset together. And so they march into the theater in Ephesus, open air theater, and they're chanting, great is the god Artemis of the Ephesians, and great, and they're just chanting that. And then we have the rest of the story is a Jew gets up, Alexander the Jew, and he's going to try to quiet the crowd. Paul tries to get in, and the disciples are like, no, you're not going, Paul. And they drag a couple of other Paul's companions out with them and drag them down the street. It's a mess. It's a mess, like almost a riot. Mm-hmm. And so much so that the clerk in Ephesus, which would have been a Roman representative, either he was a man of Ephesus who worked for Rome or just placed in power, whatever, but he would have been a liaison to Rome, and basically saying, hey, what we're doing here is wrong. It's against the law, and if Rome finds out, we're going to be in trouble, because I'm supposed to keep the peace here in Ephesus. And a significant thing that he does is he seeks to discredit what Paul's saying. He's saying, guys, we all know that the head of Artemis fell from the sky. this goddess that was given to us. We all know that's the truth. So whatever this Paul is saying, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference. It's gonna blow over. It's gonna go away. So let's disperse before this gets any worse. We don't want anybody killed or to break any laws. And so that's where we leave it. Is the crowd is dispersed, and then he dismissed the assembly, and that's the end of chapter 19. And so it's fascinating. So we begin to ask the question, and I think this is the beauty of inductive Bible study is we read it, we ask questions of the text, we seek to dissect the text in a good way, not in a bad way, because we're digging for what is going on behind the scenes. Why did it lead to this place? Who were these main characters, and what were they saying? And from that, I just said Sunday, a very, very simple application is that we are to share the gospel and that we're to be prepared for the opposition. Mm-hmm. And how many times have we shared that same thought through the book of Acts?
Right.
How many times have we followed Paul or followed Peter, and they're saying these things, and difficulty, disappointment, even death comes. There's 3 Ds. That's come upon the disciples, come upon the people, the followers of the way. Some of them are killed. Some of them are dragged away. Some of them are stoned for the gospel. But even 20 chapters later, we're still saying the same application of this text. Share the gospel and be prepared for opposition. It's coming. So that's to me, it's still important. It's still the main point that these missionary journeys were for evangelism and for edification, to share the gospel and to encourage believers, to make disciples. And along the way, as you're sharing the gospel, you're going to make some people mad because you're cutting into, and one of the things we spend a lot of time, feel free to interrupt me, I've been talking for a while.
Yeah, go for it.
One of the things we talked about Sunday was last Sunday, I believe, was the disruption of culture, and how does the gospel disrupt our culture? And then not only that, but what industries would be disrupted if the gospel was shared on a regular basis and people came to know Christ and then were discipled out of their former ways. So people are still making money off of religion, just like we said, whether it's a sports team, a religious activity, or an illegal activity, people are making money. And it doesn't all come down to money. It's the root of evil. But at the same time, man is full of evil in so many ways. The desire for flesh, the desire, all of these things. But at the root of it, people are making money along the way. And so we said, what industries in our day today would be impacted if the gospel was shared regularly and we were making disciples of all nations, even in our own town, what industries would be affected? Yeah. And that's something that is heavy. It should be heavy on every believer's heart. Is how are the least of these in our community being affected by others who are seeking to make money off of them, whether it be through substance abuse, alcohol or drugs or whatever it is, whether it be through the sex trade or sex industry where there's slavery going on, whether it be through other types of entertainment or enjoyment, or it could be in the form of business, and they're taking advantage of people. The point is, when people are confronted with the gospel, they cannot do things the way they used to do them. So the cure for all of the ills in society is the gospel. It's not government reform. It's not government programs. It's not throwing money at this and that and the other. We know that the gospel is the cure for all of these things, and so we need to share the gospel. And then when that happens, it's going to disrupt these industries. I know the sex slave industry, the pornography industry. You're talking billions and billions and billions of dollars. In our country alone, that would be disrupted, and there would be people angry about the disruption of the flow of money. And so we also have to expect and be prepared for the opposition. So
yeah,
one of the things that I said Sunday was, I throw my hand up and say, I'm prepared. I'm prepared for the opposition. That needs to be our declaration. that I'm not going to shy away from it or back down from it, even though I do sometimes. I want my declaration to be, I'm prepared for this. That's what I'm called to do. Share the gospel and then bring it on, bring the opposition.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that just personal application for me is because we always want to evaluate and see how well we're doing at certain things. For me, evangelism, how good of a gospelizer am I? How good of an evangelist am I? And one of the things that really stood out to me through the whole message and reading ahead and was that opposition. And I got to thinking, do you think that in order to evaluate how effectively you are evangelizing is to see how much opposition you have to...
That's interesting.
Maybe not to you personally, but to maybe to you personally.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, are people avoiding you because they know... Mm-hmm. Like, I know there are right ways and wrong ways to share the gospel, to invite people into a relationship with God, but I don't know. It just got me thinking, like, a lot of times we are so consumed, whether at the job, to maintain a level of being inconspicuous, just kind of fit in, lay low, to be a kind individual, and let our actions preach the gospel and all that those types of things. But even going back to kind of what you were saying about Paul and kind of the mindset that he has going into this, like he wanted to go to these places in order to share the gospel, in order to evangelize. And every single thing that we're reading, and I know it's somewhat of a different culture too. Like, they face different kind of opposition than what we're going to face today.
Yeah.
It was anticipating the opposition, almost expecting people to be against you, knowing that you're going to get kicked out of the town or your life being threatened or being stoned or whatever the case may be. Like, he was going into those places expecting that to happen. And I don't know, for me personally, it was one of those weeks where I was taking account of, well, I wonder how good am I really at sharing the gospel? Because, I don't know that I face tons of opposition. I may get caught off like, I don't do the church thing, or I'm not. Yeah. And, I get those conversations a bit like, I used to go to church, but I'm not really into it. And so it's kind of like, you're testing the spirit to see, like, how far do I go with this conversation constantly?
Yeah.
But I don't get tons of opposition. So I'll go back to my original question, which was, do you think that's a good litmus test for if we're an effective evangelizer?
Man, I'm going to probably get this wrong, okay? So just bear with me. But I think in our community, we said Sunday that we are in I don't know if I can say oversaturated or if that's repetitive, but a saturated gospel area. Mm-hmm. There are churches on every corner. Everybody has 6 degrees of separation. You can get to whatever, but most people in our community have 1 to 2 degrees of separation to someone who has been a devout churchgoer at some point. So when we talk about church, when we talk about religion, there's not a ton of people in our community that would be opposed to speaking with us about that. But when we really share the gospel, to the extent that the gospel transforms, I think that's where we will really meet the opposition. So most of the time as well, the average person only talks about the gospel when they're inside the church. Yeah. And I'm all for, please don't get me wrong, because I'm a hypocrite if I don't believe this, but we work here at the church. So the man or the woman that comes and says, look, I'm going to lose my job if I talk openly about Christ at work, and I say to them, well, you need to lose your job. That's pretty hypocritical of me, if someone who works at a place that I'm expected to talk about God. So we would instruct them to do as Jesus did, to love as Jesus did, to speak as Jesus did. And when the door opens, then share the gospel with someone. We don't go in like a jerk or guns a-blazing, we're going to burn this place down. But you show that's speaking and showing. I believe there's a good balance of that, because your goal is, I would say the goal is not to be fired for your position, but to gain an opportunity to speak, and then to be wise in that and knowing when to speak. So to say, I don't have any opposition in my life, so therefore I'm probably not sharing the gospel effectively. Is that a good litmus test? I think it has to be to a certain extent. But again, the caveat is, in an area that's saturated with the gospel, unless we are forcing, or unless we're just over and over and over, most people would be receptive to because they're kind, or they're Southern, and they would say, sure, I'll listen to what you have to say. But again, going back to, and I'm not trying to beat around the bush or go around it, but this is, sometimes we share the gospel in a way that with somebody, we're sitting in a doctor's office and conversation leads that way, and we just share a truth about our relationship with God. We may never see that person again. But then other times it's through building relationships with people. And there's two different schools of thought on that when you talk to people who are very knowledgeable about disciple making. It's called discipling people to Jesus, or salvation then discipleship. And so the way is, for the first one is that, let's say that I meet you, our kids play on the same team, and we're hanging out at games, and we're, and then we're friends, and then now, like, hey, let's our families go out to eat, and then we're sharing, and then little by little, I'm building a relationship with you, not a manipulative way, but I genuinely care about you and your family, and we're, and then you begin to ask questions, and then slowly, and then weeks or even months later, then you look around and say, I believe everything you're saying. I'm, and then that person has been discipled to Jesus, rather than I meet you the first time at a ball game and I say, Chad, have you ever thought about the end of your life? Or, maybe something happens, and then boom, I share the gospel the first time, and you are forced with yes or no. And then if you say yes, then discipleship happens. So it's kind of an interesting way to look at it, but either way, that may not lead to opposition. It's typically in times where we're disrupting someone. I had somebody tell me last week at Bible study that they had shared the gospel with a family member, and the family member brings it up multiple times every time the family's together, and kind of rudely shares that, and so it's like it's created some opposition in their family, and that's hard. But at the same time, the person that was telling me is very passionate, and I agree. They need to hear the gospel.
Yeah.
We can't go to our graves knowing that we didn't share the gospel, even with our own family. Mm-hmm. So I think that yes, we should, not just as individuals, but I think collectively as a church, we should be creating opposition by sharing the gospel and disrupting societal norms and cultural norms in our city and our towns. One of the things that I said Sunday was the gospel is powerfully disruptive because repentance is turning from sin. Okay, so it's going to disrupt lifestyle, it's going to disrupt entertainment, it's going to disrupt all these things. But also, then, if we know that it's powerfully disruptive, we also have to understand it's powerfully opposed. So the opposition that Paul faced was not just, that family member doesn't speak to me anymore, or that this doesn't happen anymore. We're talking about riots and stonings and beatings and death. And so I think also comparing our lives to that, comparing that with believers in Nigeria or in Brazil, or places where you can be stoned to death still. You can be beaten. You can be killed for your faith. And so I think it's a matter of perspective for us. Like, what do we see now, and then what do we see happening in the coming days?
Yeah.
So that was a long answer to say I didn't answer your question.
Well, that's
just discussing it.
pretty typical, right? No, I'm just kidding. No, okay, so let's go to a little bit more of the story of what had happened and talk about maybe like when it says in verse 30, but Paul wished to go in among the crowd and the disciples would not let him. Why was Paul, do you have any insight into why was Paul wanting to go into this area and why would they not let him?
Well, I think just based on Paul, he wanted to go in the area because he knew he would have a captive audience of the majority of business leaders and other craftsmen, skilled laborers in the community who were riled up about all of this. The clerk would be there. Alexander must have been a prominent Jew because they put him up there. So Paul's like, look at all these people that are gathering in this place. I'm going to go share the gospel with them and tell them why we're doing what we're doing. And in Paul's mind, this could have been another, 3,000 people converted at one time. What his disciples, I think, and remember who the disciples are. The disciples are probably men of Ephesus who were there. Some of them used to be magicians or used to be sorcerers, or they were ones that burned their books. They were ones that said, hey, I believe I'm turning from my ways and turning to Christ. And so I believe that they were saying, dude, they're going to kill you. This is bad. They're literally going to kill you, because they had been around this their whole lives. I'm speculating. It doesn't tell us. True. But that's who was there, the disciples, hey, don't go. And I think also the providence of God that Paul still had more work to do. Whereas Paul would have said, they're going to kill me? Oh, cool.
Yeah.
What a way to go.
Yeah, his personality was one to kind of run toward those types of things and kind of be bold. And
yeah, let's go. If I die, I'm with Christ. If I live, I'm live for Christ. So he didn't care. But I think there was, obviously God is in control of all things, but too, I think those disciples probably just grabbed him like, no, man, you're not going in there. And it doesn't tell us that Paul, it just says that they urging him not to venture. Mm-hmm. Was there an argument? We don't know. Was Paul pulling away? We don't know. But I think at the end of the day, Paul, like, yeah, you're right. We've got more work to do.
Yeah. Well, kind of the end of the story, in effect, was that nothing really happened. Like they gathered, kind of stirred up a lot of dust, talked a lot, got loud for a few hours, and then, all right, go back home.
Yeah.
Which, this is pretty typical for a lot of things, and unless you're in like Seattle or something like that, and you like burn a lot of the places and create a lot of havoc. But kind of much to do about nothing in a sense. Like leave these guys alone. They haven't done anything.
If you want to take
illegal,
it to court,
we
got proconsuls ready to do that.
Yeah. So some wisdom in there, right?
Yeah. I think the clerk did his job that day.
He didn't want to fill out the paperwork is what it was.
He did not want to deal with Rome, who would have said, why did you let this get out of hand? So off with your head. Yeah. So and at the same time, he did his job, civil job, and that's what we have courts and things for. So yeah, it's very interesting because you see the Roman side, the Ephesian side, and then you see the gospel side as well, So can things always be handled civilly when it comes to sharing the gospel in the community? No, not always. Mm-hmm. That there will be times where we will lose our heads. I mean, physically. We don't need to lose our heads. Is that metaphorically?
Sure.
Where we're just spouting off and yelling, and we're the ones doing the screaming or chanting. I believe that if our model is Paul was very bold in his speaking, and he took every opportunity, just as in Athens and with Lydia, all these places he went and ventured to places he'd never been, sharing the gospel, not knowing the results, but just laying it out there. Yeah. But he wasn't ugly, and he didn't want to fight people, and he didn't pick up a stone if somebody else did, like bring it on kind of thing. Yeah. Because it all goes back to he had met Jesus. And that the reminder for us is it all goes back to Jesus. And yes, I remember thinking as a kid, as a teenager, even as an adult, I wish Jesus would have stood up for himself a little more. When they were beating him and pulling his beard out, when they were mocking him, spitting on him, I wish just one time he would have just reached out and just clocked somebody. And then even if they drug him down and beat him, we'd be like, yeah, he's fighting back. But he never did. And, man, that's hard. Mm-hmm. That's hard because our Obviously, Paul was not Jesus, and he knew that. The disciples were not Jesus, and they knew that, so, but that's our model. Our model is the root is Jesus Christ. That's our source. And then a model is Paul, of how he acted because he had met Jesus on the road to Damascus and changed his life from a violent man to a man of peace, a bold man.
Yeah.
So what we learn, I believe, is that there's boldness, but it's always met with compassion, always met with truth as well.
Yeah. Amen. I think as we went through this, there are opportunities to present the gospel all around us.
Mm-hmm.
Our eyes need to be open to those. And so in prayer ahead of time, as soon as you wake up, God, give us opportunities. Let my eyes be open to those opportunities, but also give me boldness. Because I think so many times we enter into these conversations, or maybe we tend to stay away from these conversations that lead toward Jesus or the gospel. And we don't know how they're going to go or what direction they're going to go. And so we are timid, or we don't know all the answers. And so we don't enter into that conversation. But not only pray for opportunities for our eyes to be open, but also pray for boldness, because it's not us who does the speaking, that the Spirit has said that I will be with you always. And so he is the one that is in charge of that soul.
He's in charge, and we see that in Paul, a Spirit-filled man seeking the Lord on not only physically where to go, but what to say, when to say it, all those things. But at the end of the day, we could get fatigued in saying it, except that we're a lot of times preaching to ourselves as well. Mm-hmm. Do I take every opportunity to share the gospel? No, I don't. I'm convicted at times, and even we were discussing earlier a personal matter. My daughter bought her first car, and we've had some issues with it, and I've had to go home a couple times in being bold with people who are not doing the right thing, but making sure that I am doing the right thing and trusting God with the outcome.
Yeah,
we're not being persecuted or anything like that, but we're bold in fairness and in justice, but at the same time, am I representing Christ to these people even in business dealings? Mm-hmm. And that'll make you look in the old mirror. You know, make sure my tone, my everything, because we represent Christ, and then we trust Him, even if it seems like it's not working out. We trust God that He's working all things for good, for the gospel, to have an opportunity to share the gospel. So
that's exactly right.
Yeah, it's hard.
It is, and that's battling the flesh of God. I don't know. I don't have the acumen, the knowledge, the whatever to know these next steps.
Yeah,
but to trust and to rely on Him alone.
Yeah, to know that would we sign up, and that's the cliche statement. Would we sign up for something knowing it's going to be difficult and knowing the adversaries are coming? Mm-hmm. Or would we say, I'm going to bow out of that one? And we would say, oh, that's no problem. You don't have to sign up. Because when we looked at 1 Corinthians chapter 16, when Paul wrote to them about these events in Ephesus, and he says, hey, there's a door that's opened for me here in Ephesus, but, and when he said not but, I'm sorry, I made a point to say that, son, and there are many adversaries. Paul knew that trouble was a-brewing in Ephesus. Mm-hmm. He knew that people were against this. And to me, to go back to your question, Paul could feel it like, man, there's trouble coming. That means we're doing something. There's trouble coming. There's the demons. He's already seen demons. He's already seen this. He's seen that. Yeah. And he's like, I don't want to leave. I would love to come to you, but God's not finished with me here yet. And hey, guys, listen, pray for me because there's many adversaries. And adversaries to Paul were just people who were very passionate about what they believed, who could easily be turned by the gospel of Jesus Christ and transforming power. Yeah. So it's so cool to watch all of this and how it takes place in the life of Paul, and then how it so easily is applicable to us today.
Yeah. Well, and the people that Paul reached went out and then shared the gospel.
Oh man.
and then they share the gospel.
Yeah.
And so it's that
And we have the
multiplication
gospel
movement. Yeah. Multiplication movement that, we, looking at our kids, whether we are discipling them, whether we are seeing them come to know Christ and becoming effective mobilizers of the gospel, and or just, anybody we come in contact with, but as a personal at home
Starts
thing.
with the home.
Yeah. So, well, all right. So we're going to wrap up. If give us a little synopsis of what we're going into this coming Sunday. Somebody falls asleep in church.
It's so funny. We're gonna spend a little bit of time on the first section. To me, is about the timeline of places. I kind of wrote it in my notes, and I'm still going through it. The timeline of places. Why is it important that we know all of these places that Paul is setting out to go? Why is Luke so detailed in saying all these things? Well, because to me, it all goes back to the later on when the epistles were written and the gospel's going forth in this whole region. And then tucked in there at Troas, we find this brother named Eutychus, this young man named Eutychus, and he falls asleep in the window, falls to his death. 3 stories, falls to his death. And Paul,
So if you fall asleep in church,
if you fall asleep in death,
you will die
in church and die.
Oh.
We will do as Paul did. We will just come lay on you, and apparently you'll come back to life, because that's what Paul did.
That's the biggest threat.
Somebody
laying on top of you.
If the fall don't get you, I will probably kill you by falling on you. Now, it's kind of a funny story.
Yeah.
Growing up, my dad sang gospel music, and there was another friend of his who sang a song called Brother Eutychus. And I'll never forget that song.
That's almost as weird as
it's very
the drop kick me song that he used to always say.
Drop kick me Jesus through the goalposts of life.
All right,
let's go. That's a real song.
That was on the backside of that disc, right?
Yeah, Brother Eutychus. Are you all right, my brother Eutychus? It's very. We take a lot of things and turn them into stuff.
Oh man,
it's good.
All righty. Well, we'll see you Sunday. We are reading what are the passages this Sunday? How many verses are you going up through?
We will be through verse 12.
Verse 12. All right.
So Acts 20, 1 through 12 this week.
Okay, so read ahead, come prepared, get your notes ready, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Ready to discuss and engage.
It's going to be fun.
All righty. Take care. We'll see you next episode. See you, Darren.